Princess Kayla had always been told that her face must never betray her heart. From the moment she could walk, she was trained in the royal ways, how to keep her back straight, how to speak so her voice never cracked, how to smile without letting the smile touch her eyes, if she didn't mean it. An Elthery princess was supposed to be the perfect image of calm, and Kayla had mastered it. No matter what happened in the palace-heated council debates, rumors of war, whispers of assassination, she never allowed her hands to tremble or her breath to quicken. The court saw her as unshakable, a pillar of silver dignity in a fragile world. But the moment the human soldier walked into her throne room, something inside her shifted. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen up close, taller than her royal guards, broader in the shoulders, with skin touched by the sun and hair the color of midnight. His armor was not ceremonial lit, was scratched and battered, carrying the story of many battles, and his eyes, deep, unyielding eyes that seemed to look straight through the perfect mask she wore. The court went silent as he stepped forward. The sound of his boots against the crystal floor echoed in the high-domed chamber. Humans were rare here in the Elthery capital, almost mythical. Most of her people knew of them only from history lessons, tales of fierce warriors who fought in wars across the stars, driven not by duty alone, but by passion, loyalty, and stubborn will. He stopped a few steps away from her, lowering his head slightly, but not in the deep, formal bow her people were accustomed to. "Your Highness," he said, his voice deep and steady. It carried a strange weight, as though each word cost him something. Kayla kept her chin high, though she felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. "State your purpose, human." He did not flinch at her cool tone. "I have been assigned to protect you." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples through the gathered council members. Elthery royalty had always been guarded by their own kind-trained knights, sworn by blood oath. A human? It was unheard of. Kayla's eyes narrowed slightly. "Protect me. From what threat?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept the chamber, noting every guard, every shadow, every possible entry point, before returning to her. "From any threat," he said finally. "The council did not tell me details, only that there have been attempts, and that you are now my responsibility." His words were simple, but there was something in the way he said responsibility, as though it meant far more to him than a duty assigned by others. One of her senior advisors, an elderly Elthery with silver eyes, stepped forward and spoke to her in a low voice. "Your Highness, the council approved this arrangement. Captain Elias Kane is the most decorated soldier of his generation. His record is unmatched. He is effective." Kayla's gaze returned to the human. He stood with his hands behind his back, feet planted firmly, a soldier ready for orders. Yet there was no arrogance in his posture, only a quiet certainty. The kind of confidence born not from privilege, but from survival. "Very well," she said, hiding her unease behind calm formality. "You may begin your duties immediately, but understand this: here in my court, we follow Elthery customs. You will observe them." A faint shadow of a smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it came. "Understood, Your Highness." She dismissed the court soon after, but even as the chamber emptied, her thoughts remained tangled. She told herself it was simply the strangeness of the arrangement, nothing more. Humans were unpredictable, ruled by instinct, guided by emotions they wore openly. She had spent her whole life learning to bury such things, and yet, when she rose from the throne and walked past him, she felt his eyes follow her, not in the way courtiers studied a princess, but in the way a soldier studies the horizon for signs of danger. It was not the gaze of a man impressed by beauty or status. It was the gaze of someone who had already decided he would stand between her and anything that tried to harm her. For reasons she could not explain, that thought unsettled her more than any threat to her life ever had. The first days of Captain Elias Kane's service in the Elthery Palace were tense. Princess Kayla did not enjoy change. She valued routine meals, served at the same hour, guards standing at their exact posts. Every ceremony practiced until there was no room for mistakes. Elias, however, did not fit into the pattern. He was not like her Elthery guards, who moved with silent, graceful precision. Elias was steady, yes, but his presence felt heavier, like a storm that lingered on the horizon. He did not bow deeply, did not address her with the flowery phrases her court loved. Instead, he spoke plainly, almost bluntly, answering questions with only what was necessary. The court noticed, of course. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Some feared him, some disapproved of him. Others, especially the younger guards, watched him with open curiosity, fascinated by the way he carried himself. Kayla herself found him puzzling. One afternoon, she observed him during a council meeting, while the Elthery advisors debated a border treaty. Elias stood near the great crystal doors, scanning the room. He seemed more interested in the shifting light patterns on the floor, the servants carrying in trays of wine, and the guards stationed near the exits, than in the words being spoken. When the meeting ended, she approached him. "You barely looked at the council once," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of challenge. "I was looking where the danger might come from," he replied simply. "And did you find it in the floor tiles?" For a moment, his lips curved into something close to a smile. "No, but one of the wine decanters smelled wrong. I'll have it checked." She blinked, caught off guard. "You can smell poison." He shrugged. "Not always, but I've seen it used often enough to notice when something feels off." Later that day, a palace alchemist confirmed the wine had been laced with a slow-acting toxin. The intended victim had been her. She did not thank him, not out of pride, but because she wasn't sure how to. Her life had been saved, yes, but the weight of that realization unsettled her more than she cared to admit. That night, she found him again, this time on one of the high balconies overlooking the city. The sky was painted in soft gold and purple as the twin moons began to rise. He stood there without a cloak, the evening wind tugging at his hair. "You will catch an illness," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. He glanced over his shoulder, and for a moment, the hard edges of his expression softened. "If it means you live, princess, I'll take the risk." She had no reply for that. Instead, she stood beside him in silence, watching the moons climb higher. She told herself it was only courtesy that kept her there, but deep down, she knew it was something else. The next few days blurred into a rhythm neither of them had planned. Elias followed her from dawn until dusk through the vast marble gardens, into the glass-domed libraries, across the long ceremonial halls where she met with foreign envoys. He never stood too close. Yet she always knew where he was. Sometimes, she caught his gaze across the room, and it was not the gaze of a courtier admiring his princess. It was the gaze of a soldier who had already measured the distance between himself and her, calculating how many steps it would take to shield her. If danger struck, it made her feel different. Not safer exactly, but more aware. And though she would never admit it to anyone, Kayla found herself wondering about him. What had he seen in the wars humans fought? What battles had carved that calm, unshakable look into his face? And most of all, why did his presence make the palace feel smaller, yet somehow less lonely? She reminded herself that this was an arrangement of necessity, nothing more. But late one night, when she passed the outer courtyard and saw him standing in the rain again, scanning the skies, she realized something she did not want to face. Elias Kane was not just a guard. He was a question she could not yet answer. Danger came to the palace like a whisper in the dark. The first attempt was subtle, a poisoned flower placed in her chambers, its petals releasing a deadly scent when touched. Elias found it before she entered, tossing it out the window without a word. The second attempt was bolder, A shadow moved through the corridors late at night, slipping past guards. Elias caught the intruder just as they raised a blade over Keela's bed. The struggle was quick, brutal, and ended with the sound of steel clattering to the floor. Each time, Kayla watched him with growing awareness. He was not only strong, he was fast, precise, and frighteningly calm in moments that would send most people into panic. But it wasn't just his skill that unsettled her. It was the way he looked at her afterward, not as a ruler to be obeyed, not as a symbol to be protected, but as if she was someone he could not lose. She had never seen such eyes in the palace. Even the knights sworn to her family's service bowed with practiced devotion. But Elias's gaze held something unspoken, something that went beyond duty. One evening, after the palace was quiet, Kayla went searching for him. She found him in the training hall, the air heavy with the scent of sweat and the echo of sharp, repeated strikes. He was alone, driving his blade again and again into a practiced dummy. His hands were raw, blood starting to mark the worn leather grip. His breath came fast, but his focus never wavered. She stood at the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "If you keep this up, you will not be able to hold your sword tomorrow." He stopped mid-swing, but didn't turn toward her. "Better my hands than your life." The words caught her off guard. She stepped closer. "Why do you fight so hard for me? I am not the only one in danger." The council is not my responsibility," he interrupted quietly. Finally, he turned to face her. His eyes were tired, but steady. "You are," she frowned, "because the council assigned you." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he seemed to wrestle with something. "Because I failed to protect someone once," he said at last, "and I swore it would never happen again." Her chest tightened. There was a depth in his voice that no training could fake, pain, heavy and real. She wanted to ask who it had been, but something in his expression told her it wasn't a wound to be touched carelessly. For a moment, they simply stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Then Elias stepped back, giving a short nod, as if to dismiss himself. "You should rest, princess. I'll be outside your door." She returned to her chambers, but rest did not come easily. She lay awake, listening to the quiet. Somewhere beyond her walls, Elias stood guard, silent and watchful, carrying a past he did not share. It should have been simple. He was her protector. She was his duty. But as the days passed, Kayla found herself noticing details she shouldn't. How he always positioned himself to block the strongest light so she would not be blinded during outdoor ceremonies. How he scanned every crowd, not with suspicion toward all, but with a keen eye for the one who didn't belong. How he carried himself with the discipline of a soldier, yet moved with the patience of someone who understood waiting could save a life. And, slowly, her perfect mask began to crack. She started speaking to him in moments she shouldn't, brief exchanges in hallways, comments during long meetings, even the occasional question about Earth and its strange customs. Sometimes, she caught herself smiling without realizing it, and sometimes, she caught him looking at her with that same quiet intensity, like a man standing on the edge of a choice he wasn't sure he should make. For the first time in years, Princess Kayla wondered if her training to hide her heart would be enough. Because Elias Kane was not just guarding her life. He was beginning to reach places no one had ever been allowed to touch. The night was unusually quiet. No distant chatter from the palace servants. No music drifting from the banquet halls. The city beyond the high walls seemed to hold its breath. Princess Kayla could not sleep. Her chambers felt too large, the air too heavy. The attempts on her life had stopped for a few days, but the unease remained, like a shadow she couldn't shake. She rose from her bed, wrapped a silken cloak around her shoulders, and stepped into the dimly lit corridors. Her feet carried her toward the outer gardens, toward the place she knew he would be. Elias stood exactly where she expected, on the balcony that overlooked the gardens, and the glowing city lights. His posture was relaxed but alert, hands resting lightly on the railing, eyes scanning the horizon. The moonlight caught the faint scars on his face, reminders of battles fought long before he came here. "You're awake," he said without turning. "And so are you," she replied, stepping closer. "Do you never rest?" "I rest when I can," he said, "but I like to be here at night. Easier to see danger coming when the world is quiet." She joined him at the railing, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The scent of blooming night flowers filled the air. Above them, the twin moons cast silver light across the gardens. "You speak as if danger is always near," she said softly. "It usually is," he replied. His tone wasn't grim, just certain, as if he had learned the truth too many times to doubt it. For a while, they stood in silence. She found herself glancing at him, at the way the moonlight sharpened the lines of his face, at the steadiness in his stance. He did not seem restless like other guards. He seemed rooted, like the old trees in the palace courtyard, weathered, but unshakable. "You've seen many battles," she said finally. "More than I care to count," he admitted, "and yet you still fight." He looked at her then, and there was something in his eyes she had never seen directed at her before, something that felt both warm and heavy, because some people are worth fighting for. Her breath caught, but she kept her voice even. "And you think I am one of them?" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." She should have looked away, but she couldn't. Something in the way he said those words pulled at the part of her she had spent her whole life protecting, the part that longed to be seen, not as a title, but as a person. "Humans," she murmured, trying to mask her feelings with a hint of amusement. "Always speaking so boldly." "And Elthery," he countered, "always hiding what they feel." Her lips pressed together. He wasn't wrong. Every lesson she had been taught was about control of her body, her voice, her expression. The palace had never been a place for open hearts, and yet here he was, cutting through her walls with a few plain words. The silence between them shifted. It was no longer the stillness of strangers, but the quiet of two people standing at the edge of something neither could name. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "If I told you I trusted you, would you believe me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, "because I trust you too." Her heart gave a strange, unsteady beat. This was wrong, dangerously wrong. An Eltheri princess could not form attachments to her guards, least of all a foreign soldier. Such bonds blurred the lines of loyalty, of duty, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let the moment linger under the watchful moons, feeling the rare warmth of honesty between them. Elias finally looked back toward the horizon. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow will be another long day." She nodded, but as she walked away, she knew rest would not come, because, for the first time in her life, her carefully trained composure had been shaken not by fear, not by politics, but by the steady, unyielding presence of one human soldier, and she was no longer sure she wanted to hide it. If you want, I can now expand part 5 to 700 words. The morning began like any other, soft light spilling through the crystal windows, the distant hum of the city below, the calm rhythm of the palace corridors. But by midday, the air had changed. Kayla first noticed it in the way Elias moved. He was already sharp, already alert, but now every step he took was deliberate, his eyes scanning with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. He spoke little, answering her questions with brief, clipped replies. "What is it?" she asked, as they walked toward the council chamber. "Something's wrong," he said simply. "I can feel it." Moments later, the first blast hit. The palace shook violently, a deafening roar filling the air. Shards of crystal fell from the high windows, scattering like rain. Smoke poured into the hallways, and the alarms began to scream. Keela's heart pounded an attack. Before she could finish, Elias had already moved. He pulled her behind a marble pillar just as another explosion tore through the chamber doors. Guards shouted orders, weapons drawn, but the rebels poured in with ruthless precision. Elias drew his blade in one smooth motion, stepping in front of her. "Stay behind me." The world turned into chaos. The clang of steel rang out as Elias met the first wave of attackers. His movements were quick, efficient, every strike meant to end a fight before it began. Kayla had seen soldiers train before, but this was different. This was survival. A rebel lunged toward her from the side. Before she could even react, Elias was there, slamming the attacker into the wall. "Move," he barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her down the corridor. Smoke burned her lungs, the shouts of the battle echoing behind them. They reached the grand staircase, only to find more rebels blocking the path. Elias didn't hesitate. He charged, cutting through them with brutal precision. Kayla could only watch, caught between fear and awe. An explosion ripped through the floor above them, sending debris crashing down. The blast threw them apart, and for a terrifying moment, Kayla lost sight of him. "Elias," she called, panic rising in her chest. Through the smoke, she saw him stagger to his feet, just as a rebel raised a blade behind him. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen guard's weapon, slender ceremonial sword, and ran forward. The rebel turned just as she struck. The blade cut through his guard, sending him sprawling to the floor. Kayla's hands shook. She had been trained in basic self-defense, but never in real battle. Her people had never seen their princess fight, and yet, in that moment, she had not thought about rules, about appearances, or about the council's expectations. She had only thought about keeping him alive. Elias reached her in 2 quick strides, eyes wide. "You," he stopped, glancing at the rebel on the floor. "You saved my life." "I wasn't going to let you fall," she said, her voice shaking but steady enough to hold his gaze. For a heartbeat, the battle seemed to fade. Then shouts from behind snapped them back to reality. "The escape chamber," Elias said urgently. Now, they ran through twisting corridors as the palace crumbled around them. Twice more, rebels tried to intercept them, and twice Elias cut them down. Kayla followed without hesitation, her cloak torn, her heart hammering. When they finally reached the heavy steel door of the escape chamber, Elias shoved it open and pushed her inside. "There's one shuttle left," he said, voice sharp with urgency. She froze. "One," he nodded. "You take it." "No," she said instantly. "We both leave." "Kayla, your life means the future of your people. Mine doesn't. Don't you dare decide that for me." She snapped, stepping closer. "You think I care about the crown more than she?" Stopped herself. The rest of the sentence caught in her throat. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, with a rough motion, Elias pushed her into the shuttle and slammed the hatch shut. She pounded on the door, shouting his name, but the engines roared to life. Through the small window, she saw him turn, blade in hand, to face the rebels closing in. And then the shuttle rose, carrying her away from the palace, away from him, into the dark sky. She pressed her hand to the glass, her chest aching with something far heavier than fear. The shuttle landed far from the burning capital, on the green plains that stretched beyond the city walls. The moment the hatch opened, Kayla stumbled out, her knees weak, her heart pounding in her ears. The night was filled with the distant glow of fire. She could still hear the faint thunder of explosions in the direction of the palace. She wanted to run back. Every instinct screamed for it. But the council guards were there, guiding her toward a waiting transport. "Your Highness, we must leave," one of them said. "The rebels will come here next." "I'm not going anywhere without him," Kayla replied, her voice sharper than she intended. They exchanged uneasy glances. The human soldier knew the risk. He stayed behind so you could escape. "You cannot waste his sacrifice." Waste his sacrifice. The words twisted like a knife in her chest. She had not asked him to stay behind. She had not given him permission to trade his life for hers. As the transport carried her away from the battlefield, she sat in silence, her cloak pulled tightly around her. She could not stop seeing it, the last moment before the shuttle door closed, his figure turning back toward the fight. She didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Reports came in conflicting, incomplete. Some said the rebels still held the palace. Others claimed the royal guard had retaken parts of it. No one could confirm if Elias Kane had survived. The council moved quickly, establishing a temporary seat of power in the northern provinces. They surrounded her with new guards, Selthari knights in polished armor, trained to bow low and keep their distance. But none of them stood the way he did. None of them looked at her like she was more than the crown on her head. On the third night, she went to the council chamber. The advisors rose when she entered, bowing in unison. "Your Highness," said Elder Varen, the head of the council, "we are relieved you are safe, but now we must focus on securing the throne. The rebels are, I want a search team sent into the capital." Kayla interrupted. "We need to find Captain Elias Kane." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "That is impossible," Varen said after a pause. "The city is too dangerous, and he is only one soldier. We cannot risk more lives for him." Her voice was sharper now, rising in a way that made every advisor in the room stiffen. "Do you know how many times that one soldier has saved my life? How many attacks he stopped before they ever reached me?" Varen hesitated. "Your Highness, I understand your gratitude, but this is not about gratitude. You are the heir to the throne. Our priority must be your survival, not my survival," she said slowly. "Means nothing if I abandon those who fought for me." Silence filled the chamber. For a moment, Kella's mask of composure slipped. They could all see the truth. In her eyes, the refusal to let him become just another name lost to war. Finally, Varen sighed. "Even if we found him, bringing him here would cause political difficulties. The people would question why their princess risked so much for a foreign soldier. The old families would see it as weakness." "Then let them," Kayla said. "If they call it weakness to protect the one who protected me, I will wear that weakness like a crown." The council was still debating when she left the chamber. She had already made her decision. That night, Kayla slipped away from the northern palace with only a single trusted servant and a small transport. No banners, no escort. Just the determination burning in her chest. She would not wait for news. She would not sit safely behind guarded walls while he faced the wreckage alone. Elias Kane had fought through fire and steel to keep her alive. Now it was her turn to fight for him. The journey back to the capital was long and dangerous. Kella's small transport had to weave through dark valleys to avoid rebel patrols. The once bright skyline of the city was now broken, towers shattered, streets littered with debris, smoke still rising from the heart of the palace. Her servant begged her to turn back. "Your Highness, it's not safe. If you are captured, I will not be captured," Kayla said, her voice steady. "And I will not leave without him." They moved under cover of night, slipping through ruined streets until the palace gates came into view. The once glorious silver arches were blackened with scorch marks. The great doors hung open, splintered from the fighting. Inside, the halls were eerily quiet. Statues lay broken, tapestries torn. Every step echoed in the emptiness. Kayla searched room after room, calling his name only in whispers. She found wounded soldiers, both loyalists and rebels, too weak to fight. Some recognized her, eyes widening in shock that their princess had returned alone. At last, in the half-collapsed west wing, she heard movement. She followed the sound, her heart pounding. The corridor opened into what had once been the guard barracks. The walls were scorched, the ceiling partially fallen, dust drifting through the air. And there, leaning against a broken pillar, was Elias Kane. He looked thinner, his armor battered, his left arm bound with torn cloth. His face was pale, but his eyes, those same deep, unyielding eyes, lifted to meet hers. "Kayla," he said, his voice rough but alive. She froze for a heartbeat, every part of her wanting to believe she wasn't dreaming. Then she ran to him. Protocol, dignity, royal composure, none of it mattered. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands gripping his shoulders, as if afraid he might vanish. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I told you," he said with a faint, tired smile. "I'm not failing you." She laughed softly, though it broke halfway into a sob. "You stayed. You could have escaped, but you stayed." His gaze softened. "I wasn't leaving while they were still coming for you, and I wasn't sure you made it out." "I made it out," she said firmly, "because of you." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the noise of the broken palace fading into the background. Then Kayla slid her arm under his and helped him to his feet. "We're leaving," she said. "You came here for me." His voice was low, almost disbelieving. "I crossed half the city for you," she replied. "If the council calls it foolish, then I will be a fool. But I will not be a coward who abandons the one who saved me." Elias shook his head slightly, as if trying to process her words. "You're not supposed to care this much." She met his gaze without hesitation. "Then I will break that rule." They made their way out of the ruins together, supporting each other through the shattered halls. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the city, casting gold across the smoke and rubble. As they reached the edge of the palace grounds, Kayla paused and looked back. The place where she had been raised, where she had been taught to hide her heart, now lay in ruins. She turned to Elias, her voice quiet but sure. "When we rebuild, I will not hide anymore. Not from the council, not from my people, and not from you." He studied her for a moment, then gave the faintest nod. They walked on together, step by step, leaving the broken palace behind, and though the city still burned, Kayla felt something new in her chest, something stronger than fear, heavier than duty. For the first time in her life, she was not just a princess guarded by a soldier. She was a woman who had chosen who she would fight for, and she knew Elias Kane would never have to wonder where he stood in her heart.